Rustkit had so many of these doggone motors in the 60s that allegedly, the story goes, they're like, how do we get rid of them all? So they're like, I got it. We're going to make a slot car with 2 motors. It's going to be 4-wheel drive. I don't know if they're from New York. I just felt like saying that. What's up, people? So let's talk about Shinoda slot cars, 124 scale slot cars in the 60s. It's super cool! In fact, there's a world reunion race coming up of the Larry Shinoda reunion race at Downriver Speedway and Hobbies up in Lincoln Park, Michigan at the end of November. Now, that's a long way of saying something that's really neat because Larry Shinoda was a badass American designer. Back in the days of designing the C2 and C3 Corvette, the Mako Sharks, the prototypes, instrumental in the Chaparral race cars, and the GS2, which is another cool GM race car prototype, lost to history and basically sitting in a shed collecting dust in Texas somewhere, but shh, you're not supposed to know that. So I want to show you guys what are 1960 slot cars like and what are Larry Shinoda slot cars. So Shinoda, obviously big time automotive designer back in the 60s, very famous in that regard. He was also a racer, but design did not stop with race cars and prototypes with the car companies. The guy's mind kept going. He kept wanting design, and some of his stuff was too radical for that. So this guy found his design's life in slot car racing in the 60s. Now, if you haven't figured out what slot cars are, they're model cars with an electric motor. They run on a track. They pick up positive and negative current, and you can race them by controlling the throttle and braking, and it's very exciting. In the 60s, there were giant 8-lane tracks, and a lot of them still exist today. If you can find them, you got to look carefully because this isn't super connected in the internet world. But it's just a wonderful, amazing hobby and the absolute best place for young people to get hands-on with engineering and fabrication and racing, and one of my absolute favorite hobbies. If I could never race a car or motorcycle or fly an airplane again, I would be all about building slot cars. So let's talk about Larry Shinoda and the designs. Now, first of all, this is the first one that I finished off. Slot car going. I really wanted to come up with a really cool 1960s look, so I hand painted this with some acrylic pearls and such to this color here, and I named it the Snazzy Riot. So this car is one of Larry Shinoda's designs. It's a polycarbonate vacuum form body, and this one is on it's not really exactly a 60s, but it's a brass pan for the retro Can-Am class that people call. It's got the more modern, smaller electric motor in it, but this car is very reflective of what people would have raced as called a thingy back in the late 1960s. So it's pretty cool. And I'm kind of proud of painting this, but something I just enjoy so much in the evening because it allows you to concentrate and get hands-on and build something wonderful, your own creation, your own paint job, nothing else like that. And that's a lot of fun. Now the bodies, when they start off, they're vacuum formed over a mold. So the polycarbonate is heated up and it gets shrunk over it. So this is another Shinoda design. This is not cut out yet. You can see the little seam here, basically where you'd about cut it out and effectively where the wheels and such would go. But you know, isn't that neat? Here's another Shinoda design. This would be for like a Grand Prix Formula car, but very futuristic, very pointy. This is the one called the Hammerhead for obvious reasons. I know you guys can barely see that, but just showing it to you here. So I want to go over this and why it's exciting. Here's one that's painted I want to show you, and this was actually on loan to me by a guy named Gene. He's instrumental. He actually vacuum forms all these bodies and does this. So this gentleman who sent me this is just such a nice guy, a champion of the model car industry. And you know, I gotta tell you what, I was taken aback because I wanted to get ready for this Shinoda reunion race coming up, and I was able to buy a couple of bodies at Downriver Hobbies, but they only had so many things. So Elliot there, who's running it, got me connected with Gene. I talked to him on the phone, and he was going to connect me with some bodies, the Hammerhead and the Grand Prix ones and such I needed. And I kid you not, the guy literally sent these to me without even charging me initially. I mean, that is just wonderful, gentlemanly community. And he says, I'll send you one of my cars. You can run that or whatnot. And I said, no, that's okay. I'll build my own. You don't have to go to that trouble. But he sent me, he beautifully wrapped. And this is a gorgeous slot car that he handmade. Look at that thing. Look how low that is. Isn't that amazing? I mean, that is just wonderful craftsmanship and engineering, art. And I'm just so touched. So thank you, Gene, and thank you to the slot car racing community. It's such a wonderful place. But he also sent me a number of old parts, new old stock parts from the 60s. Do you believe that? Look at this. Things to set stuff up, tongues and all. So I want to show you and go over that. And obviously I got my slot car racing box back here. And so let's go over that. So this is the first one I made. This is for what is called the Unlimited class. So we're running a little bit more modern-ish kind of brass chassis that you can make from, this one's by JK. And you can see another Unlimited car here of mine. This one I'm in the process of building. This has got a different Shinoda body on. This one's a little lower, a little more chiselly, probably better aerodynamically than this one, but this one's funky cool, and I'm okay with that. Now here's a JK chassis that I just started soldering up. And if you look at this block, this is heat resistant, so I can solder on it and use a really heavy duty stained glass type soldering iron, because you really got to pour the heat in there. And so you make this, you set it up, you cut it, you decide how do you want your front axle to be, what kind of wheels, they've got to be 60s like, and use piano wire here. And this one up I soldered up last night, actually, while I was on a podcast. It was kind of fun, but it was a car podcast, so they thought that was cool. You see the bottom here, the top where I was doing the soldering iron, getting it to flow. And the torsion, you can see some torsion in here. And you can also see how the it kind of floats around this outer part. I don't know if you can see that right there. But it's effectively the torsion and the kind of flopping of these pans acts as the suspension dampening of these little slot cars. So this is one that's in the works of being built, needs the guide flag, which runs in the groove here. I've got a motor. This is actually a period correct 16D size motor from the company Ruskit. Actually, fun fact, Ruskit had so many of these doggone motors in the 60s that allegedly the story goes, they're like, how do we get rid of them all? So they're like, I got it. We're going to make a slot car with 2 motors. It's going to be 4-wheel drive. I don't know if they're from New York. I just felt like saying that. So here's one of the original Ruskit Can-Am cars. Low T70. It's got 2 motors in there and it's 4-wheel drive. Isn't that cool? Anyway, that's a sidebar fun fact of slot car racing history and why this is just so much fun to me. So anyway, this is one in the mix. It's going to have an inline motor with the pinion and a crown gear here. Crown being for inline versus spur gear when it's a sidewinder sort of affair. And of course your tires. And then this body I'll be setting up, cutting out the wheel wells. And when you paint the body, you paint it from the inside out. And that's really neat because obviously this polycarbonate is very shiny, very pretty, and it's clear. So when you paint it on the inside, not only is it impact resistant, but the clear polycarbonate acts like the deepest clear coat you have ever seen. So it's very beautiful, very exciting to lay over, like for instance with this one, the beautiful gold pearls. And I actually painted this with some acrylic in an airbrush I got at the local art store at Art Supply Depot. I hand brushed on the purple and then sprayed the gold pearl, and then I backed that up with a white so that when the light comes through, goes through the clear polycarbonate, sparkles off the gold pearl, and then when it's trying to go through the pearl, it helps reflect off that white paint backing, so it's really nice. And then of course got a detailed cockpit inside there you can see. Let's go over to one I'm in the mix of building. This one I'm really excited about. Of course, I'm ruining the surprise for all the other slot car guys, but I want to bring it to you all because I think it's just such a wonderful hobby. Now this chassis here, this was made by Cox, a very famous model company since the 60s. Now they make control line airplanes, slot cars, 049 glow engines, things like that. This, if I'm not mistaken, was the ISO Fulcrum chassis. You can see that this sort of lifts up like this, keeps the guide flag in there so it can like pop a wheelie or float over tracks and whatnot. You see the motor stays right there. These are the original front wheels. They're very skinny, kind of like a drag, and they've got nice little bearings in them. The rear are foam and billet aluminum, which is really neat. Actually, I have a slightly more modern crown gear on it just because that's what I had. You really got to kind of scour the world to find the old 60s parts. So that's one of the little challenges of building a proper vintage car for racing, but which is also the nice thing about having the Unlimited class because these parts and such are far more readily available. But that's the fun of it. You got to kind of go on a hunt. Anyway, so this car was special back in the 60s because they came in the cucaracha, as it was called. And that was just the name back in the 60s of the cockroach. It wasn't like an SJW being racist. Don't hate me. So anyway, there was that and the Chaparral 2E. And in the Chaparral 2E, you see the motor here. Now, when it would torque, watch this. It goes left and right like this. It would torque when you would accelerate or decelerate. And you can see this little arm here going up and down, connected to this piano wire. Watch this. So when the motor torques, that goes up and down. Now, what I did was, if you notice these little brass tubes here, I bent some piano wire to go in there with a little tape and fit in there in these brass tubes. So check this out. So we take the chassis, And this is the body I'm using. This is one of Larry Shinoda's more realistic looking ones. You can see the interior in here that I got to paint. Now this body looks very similar to the actual General Motors GS2 race car prototype, as well as the Chaparral 2A race car, which you racing geeks might know won Sebring, I think, in 1965, and looked a lot like the Mach 5 Speed Racer cartoon car. But anyway, so I cut out the wheel wells and I put in the nice little holes. So I'm going to put this little piano wire push rod here, push-pull rod through the body, okay? And I'm setting it in place. My little brass tubes poke through holes in the body here. Okay, so you can see that sits there nicely. Now I got to kind of squish the cockpit there to make it fit, so I'll come back to that. But what I made, and I keep in mind none of this is painted, I made a little stilt wing, which was typical to the late 60s. I'm thinking like 1968. There was a year or two they put stilt wings on Formula 1, Formula 5000, and Can-Am. So this little piano wire goes down these brass tubes and just fits in there with tension, which is nice. And I made it so that the wing here, look at this, the little polycarbonate wing can flip. And of course the piano wire's got to be connected. I made a little piece if I didn't just lose it, which will be taped on. I've got it apart. If you go on my Instagram, you can see a little video of me pushing the motor and making it work. But what's neat about this is, in all honesty, is it going to help the performance of this slot car that much or in the best way possible? Yeah, probably not. Truthfully, a slot car, you want to keep it really light, maybe just put a spoiler on it and it'll do just fine. This is really getting into the world of a little bit of novelty and a lot of nostalgia. I'm a big fan of the Chaparrals, big fan of racing history, and big fan of slot car racing history. And Cox, with this chassis, made the Chaparral 2E have the movable wing like that. So that's effectively what I'm doing here. I'm just making it lighter weight, a little more sophisticated, and of course the beautiful Larry Shinoda design for that reunion race coming up. So pretty proud of that. Got to paint it, of course. I think I'm going to go a light metallic blue, perhaps. And that's just exciting. And that's why I love so much these slot cars, because there's no directions. And every one is different. You can put your personal taste in it. You get to fabricate chassis with soldering irons and use Dremel tools. And these are all things that you can do at home on your kitchen table or in a den. I mean, look at this, this place. It's old school, and you used to sit around and have some fancy adult apple juice and, play games and enjoy being around people. I still enjoy that, and I do so love building slot cars. Radio control is great. It's a lot more expensive, a lot more complex, and requires a higher skill level too. So slot cars is a great point of entry. Recently, there was a Boy Scout troop that came out to Genius Garage to check out the real race cars and airplanes. Very nice young men and a couple young ladies. And I invited some of the parents and troop leaders to bring their young people, their kids and whatnot, out to race slot cars. And actually, this one is a modern one, but I'm going to give this to the one young lady when she comes over with her dad and her brother to set up some slot car bodies and whatnot. Her brother's got a car, but I think she should have a car too. And then we'll paint up some Can-Am car bodies together. A couple other things I'm going to show you. So this one's kind of neat. This is the hammerhead body I showed you a minute ago. This one's a little trickier for me. This one has to be for the vintage class. So this is unlimited. It's a little more modern in some ways, but in the scope of what vintage was. This is also going to be the unlimited, kind of the more modern chassis, a little more modern engine. This one is a proper vintage car. That is a 60s chassis. This is something you could have built back then, with the exception of that gear. Although the gear is basically exactly the way they were in the 60s. It's just pink, so we're splitting hairs. But this one, the gentleman Gene, who sent me this just absolutely beautiful car that'll probably kick my butt. He's very, very good at crafting these. He was so nice as to send me this drop arm here. You see the brass and piano wire? That was made by Champion. And an original guide flag. Oh, I'm losing his parts like Antique Roadshow when they break it. These amazing wheels, these front wheels with the piano wire, it's pre-bent. And then Elliot, the nice young man who's running the event, he let me borrow, I think this is a 26D racing motor and the rear end. And these are original braids that rub the track to get the electricity. And I'm just, gosh, there's such nice community, such nice people that have helped me out get set up to build a 60s slot car. And again, there's no directions. You can't just find these things. So, this isn't just plug and play, modern, American, just punch a button on Amazon. You can go on eBay and find some old stuff and refurbish it. But it's it's really neat because, you know, it's real race car building. Real. I know it sounds silly, but come on, guys. Like, I've driven some pretty zoomy stuff at Indianapolis and Road America and whatnot, and I love these. They're so great. The racing of these slot cars gets me tense and excited. Yeah. So I'm either crazy or have had too much adult apple juice, or slot car racing is still an amazing thing. I think it's so much fun for adults. I think it's such a great thing for young kids. And I'm really excited about this Shinoda slot car reunion race coming up at the end of November here at Downriver, and the incredibly nice people that have helped me do this. And it's always fun to go on a scavenger hunt to make something. But I kind of enjoy this too on a personal level. My grandparents on my dad's side, I never really got to know. My grandfather died when I was a kid, and my grandmother I just never got to see when I was young. But I remember going in their basement, and they have all those neat things, you know, that you see from like the 40s and 50s and whatnot, or 60s from when my dad was a kid. And it's all those neat things that people used to make when they were being crafty in their basement. You know, things that modern culture doesn't pay attention to. So not only is this enjoyable for building real race cars and engineering and art and, you know, being part of a nice community and even automotive history, but it kind of lets you live beyond your years too. And that's one reason why I've enjoyed vintage racing and vintage cars so much. But I just really wanted to show you guys how cool slot car racing still is. It's still happening. It's more difficult to find the tracks because, I'll be honest, these slot car tracks are usually hobby businesses by people, and they're not really necessarily super connected on social media and whatnot. So you really got to look. You kind of make friends and get in there and travel. But and these tracks are so big that you really don't have them at your home. 24 scale is very big. The smaller 32nd scale tracks, which are commercially available for companies like Scale Extric or Neemco or Cars by Fly and whatnot, those are more reasonable to have at home. But the 24 scale always felt very special to me because you go home, you build a car, you set it up, you make new bodies, and you do the best job you can, just like a real racing car at home in your garage. And then you get your slot car pit box and you go to the track, and you spend time with nice people and have really good sporting close competition where hundredths of a second matter. And it's just very exciting and a lot of fun. I'm really glad to be invited recently by Elliot, who's running the Shinoda race through YouTube. He found me here and being a part of that. And I hope you guys will look it up, maybe come out and watch, and just be a part of that and get involved with slot car racing too. Doesn't matter if you're 9 years old or 90 years old. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Keeping it positive tonight. No horrific, crazy, controversial things. And if you like this, please share it. In the meantime, I hope you will like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys next time.